at the beginning. I don't have that, but just to like give people time to jump in. So I'm just going to stall for a minute. I'm just going to share about my day. And then once we get about a minute in, then I'll start digging in. We've got quite a bit of reading. I'm excited. Uh, it is officially November 1st. We are past spooky season, um, but Halloween hasn't really kept Christmas stuff from starting to decorate store shelves. So that's sad. That was one of the great parts about Halloween, in my opinion, is like it kept Christmas from encroaching earlier into the year. Um, yeah, Christmas really overtook Thanksgiving fast, and now, but that's okay. I hope everyone had a good Halloween. I got to celebrate by. I got invited to go watch a cartoon miniseries called Over the Garden Wall. That was pretty neat with a relatively large group of friends, and that was a really good time. Uh, we did kind of a little mini potluck, and the host who made chili made two chilies, and one of them was specifically um, with my dietary restrictions in mind, and so that was very kind of him. And it was delicious too. It was like a sweet potato chili. I was like blown away. It was delicious. I got to keep the extras. That was great. All right, let's dig in. And I share that not just to stall for time or to vainly share about myself, but because it's relevant to what we're talking about this morning, which is relationship and friendship. Um, yeah. Uh, so without further ado, jumping in, um, I haven't been doing very much explicit study lately of like, I haven't had any Christian books that I've been consistently going through for a few months, and um, I will do like you know uh, uh, studying up on lessons for the youth group, but I haven't been doing very much personal study. I've been uh, kind of alpha and connected to other groups, but um, yeah. So I was thinking about what God's been sharing on my heart lately, or what we've been talking about. We've been talking a lot about relationships and friendships. Um, and so I was like, well, let me dig into a Bible story or two and really, I don't know, think about friendship and what God's sharing about it in the Bible. And I was trying to think, and I was coming up pretty short on good examples of friendship in the Bible, and not so much in that like there aren't good examples of friendship and like that there aren't good friends in the Bible. There are wonderful, amazing friends that we see in the Bible. We see Jesus's relationship with the disciples. We see Paul, especially, writing to friends at different churches, both specific people and just like the churches in general. And some of those later letters get very personal. A lot of the Old Testament we see um, uh, I guess, kind of prophetships like passed down, like Elijah and Elisha. Um, and we get to see like meaningful connection there. But there's usually not a lot of emphasis or description in like the relationships themselves. Um, and there's usually some very dramatic um, uh, very profound language to describe them. Like Paul will always say, like how great and wonderful and meaningful the other people that he's writing to are, and how they encourage him and do these other things, which do give us insight into to what those relationships look like and what Paul gets out of them. And we'll see sort of similar, but a little bit more maybe disconnected and like flowery language frequently in the Old Testament, um, where people will describe other people as great and wonderful and um, incredible, and they'll use these very big, very strong, um, but also very general adjectives just to describe how wonderful a person is. And it doesn't dig in a lot to like, okay, like what all, I don't know, how does this relationship functionally look? And so I was thinking, and I was coming up a little short. I thought maybe I'd dig into um, Jesus and Peter, something that I've been looking at quite a bit recently. But when I was Googling just good stories about friendship in the Bible, and one came up that I wasn't expecting at all, which was David and Jonathan. And I had to think for a second who Jonathan even was. Um, and so I was like, well, that seems like a great place for me to start. If I don't even know who this guy is, then it's not a story that I already know that I've like kind of discounted as not um, being a great example. And so I did. And I dug into starting in 1 Samuel chapter 18 and going, it talks about David and his relationship with Jonathan kind of on and off through like the first chapter of 2 Samuel. So we're going to do quite a bit of reading. We're not going to read all of that, but we're going to read some of the portions that reference David and Jonathan and their relationship. And I really appreciate, I got this as, I don't remember if I got this as a Christmas present or if I just bought this at one point, but I've got the New Oxford Annotated Bible in the NRSV. I like the NRSV. I couldn't really tell you why, but I like it's got some of the like the more, I don't know, impactful like King James-ish language, but it's also very much more like understandable, I think, and like more common. But it's not as like I don't know, like commonplace or toned down as something like The Message. And I think Sarah, the version that Sarah usually uses, the CEB, also does a good job of that and is a little bit more towards the understandable side. And I appreciate that a lot. And I think, I might get a new one that's like NLT or CEB. But anyways, so I'll get to share some of the neat stuff I learned from the annotations and commentaries in here, which was neat. So I'm starting in 1 Samuel 18, verse 1. And I'm just going to read and share a little bit. And this is taking place pretty much right after David's fight with Goliath. He has this fight, defeats Goliath, and then is coming back to Saul, and it dives like almost immediately into Saul and like bringing up Jonathan. And I think this is the first place that it gets brought up, but let me know in the comments if you are aware of him being brought up prior. But so Jonathan is Saul's son. And so they like kind of seem to hit it off and have this immediate connection between David and Jonathan. And yeah, I'll jump in. When David had finished speaking to Saul, the soul of Jonathan was bound to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. Saul took him that day and would not let him return to his father's house. Then Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as his own soul. Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that he was wearing and gave it to David, and his armor, and even his sword, and his bow, and his belt. David went out and was successful wherever Saul sent him as a result. Saul sent him over the army. And all the people, even the servants of Saul, approved. So Jonathan immediately does a couple of things. It says their souls are bound. That's interesting language. And he gives over his cloak and his robe and his armor and his weapons. And so the annotations that I've got here in the commentaries talk about this being very symbolic of the transition of power, not from Saul to his son, but Jonathan already kind of seeing like, oh, hey, this guy's different. Like seems to be like God's next anointed. This is like where the kingdom is going to go. I'm not going to succeed in my father's footsteps to the throne. This man David is, which is like incredible foresight or whatever on his part. And it seems I automatically have this very close relationship. And his bow is going to come up later, which is really cool. And this is especially interesting because if you know the story of David and Goliath, Saul tries to give David his armor, but like David's like this tiny little shepherd boy, and so that doesn't work. And so Saul's armor would have been a symbol of his leadership and his kingship and his authority. And so David like denies this initial acceptance of kingship, and then Jonathan comes in and like provides this this portrayal of succession. And so David rightfully says like responds in this metaphorical manner of like, no, Saul is currently God's anointed and currently going to be king. I'm not here to usurp him. That's a common theme that David holds throughout his time with Saul. But instead, when Jonathan presents his armor, it's accepted. And I think that's cool, is this image of David's not here to usurp Saul. He's here to follow him. He's here to be the anointed after, which is kind of cool. And like, yeah, so I think that's neat. And so that's 1 Samuel 18, and that's how that starts off. And then we get more into Saul and David's military escapades and him being very successful, and Saul developing a jealousy of that. And everyone is seeing, oh, hey, here's this guy David that's doing amazing things. He's going to be leading the kingdom. And Saul's like, wait a second, that's my job. And he gets very upset about it. So we jump to 1 Samuel 20, and this is the biggest chunk. So bear with me. This is talking to basically Saul tries to kill David. And I believe it's with like, he tries to pin him to a wall with a spear. And David like leaves and is like, what was that about? And ends up meeting with Jonathan later. Yeah. Cool. So this 1 Samuel chapter 20. David fled from Naioth in Ramah. He came before Jonathan and said, what have I done? What is my guilt? And what is my sin against your father that he is trying to take my life? He said to him, far from it, you should not die. My father does nothing either great or small without disclosing it to me. And why should my father hide this from me? Never. But David also swore, your father knows well that you like me, and he thinks, do not let Jonathan know this, or he will be grieved. But truly, as the Lord lives, and as you yourself live, there is but a step between me and death. Then Jonathan said to David, whatever you say, I will do for you. David said to Jonathan, tomorrow is the new moon, and I should not fail to sit with the king at the meal, but let me go, so that I may hide in the field until the third evening. And I'll pause in the reading and say, I wasn't super aware of this, but in the commentary it talks about like this feast meal of sacrifice that happens during the new moon for 3 days. And it would just be this time that David would be expected to go and eat with the king. If your father misses me at all, then say, and this is David still talking, David earnestly asked leave of me to run to Bethlehem, his city, for there is a yearly sacrifice there for all the family. If he says, good, it will be well with your servant. But if he is angry, then know that evil has been determined by him. Therefore deal kindly with your servant, for you have brought your servant into a sacred covenant with you. But if there is guilt in me, kill me yourself. Why should you bring me to your father? Jonathan said, far be it from you. If I knew that it was decided by my father that evil should come upon you, why would I not tell you? Then David said to Jonathan, who will tell me if your father answers you harshly? Jonathan replied to David, come, let us go out into the field. So they both went out into the field. Jonathan said to David, by the Lord, the God of Israel, when I have sounded out my father, about this time tomorrow, or on the third day, if he is well disposed towards David, shall I not send and disclose it to you? But if my father intends to do you harm, the Lord do so to Jonathan, and more also, if I do not disclose it to you, and send you away so that you may go in safety. So he's saying, if I don't share with you, David, then may God deal even more harshly with me than my father intends to deal harshly with you. May the Lord be with you as he has been with my father. This is also another implication of David following in the kingship of Israel. If I am still alive, show me the faithful love of the Lord. But if I die, never cut off your faithful love from my house. even if the Lord were to cut off every one of the enemies of David from the face of the earth. Thus Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, May the Lord seek out the enemies of David. Jonathan made David swear again by his love for he loved him as he loved his own life. This is also cool because the swearing against David's enemies, at this point, if this is true, which we know that it is, and Jonathan is confirming and believes David, would include being against his father Saul, which is like a lot to go against his father, who he does approve of and have a close relationship with, in favor of his relationship with David. Jonathan said to him, Tomorrow is the new moon. You will be missed because your place will be empty. On the day after tomorrow, you shall go a long way down, go to the place where you hid yourself earlier, and remain beside a stone there. And this part, essentially, he says, I will come out here and do some shooting practice with a servant, and I'll shoot towards this stone, and I'll tell my servant to go collect the arrows. And if I say, go collect the arrows, like further away from me, then that means that it's not safe, and David, you need to run. So hide out here to hear this message, basically. But if I say collect the arrows near to me, then that means it is safe. You can come out, and my father's not angry with you. So they set up this agreement, right? So David hid himself in the field when the new moon came. The king sat at the feast to eat. The king sat upon his seat, as at other times, upon the seat by the wall. Jonathan stood, while Abner sat by Saul's side, but David's place was empty. Saul did not say anything that day, for he thought, Something has befallen him. He is not clean. Surely he is not clean. And this is just a reference to Jewish law. If he had done something that would make him ritually unclean, most of those prohibitions would last for 24 hours. And so he was he's just done something. He's touched a dead body, whatever, didn't follow some rule. He'll be back. But on the second day, the day after the new moon, David's place was empty. And Saul said to his son Jonathan, Why has the son of Jesse not come to the feast, either yesterday or today? Jonathan answered Saul, David earnestly asked me leave of him to go to Bethlehem. He said, Let me go, for our family is holding a sacrifice in the city, and my brother has commanded me to be there. So now, if I have found favor in your sight, let me get away and see my brothers. For this reason, he has not come to the king's table. Then Saul's anger was kindled against Jonathan. He said to him, You son of a perverse, rebellious woman, do I not know that you have chosen the son of Jesse to your own shame and to the shame of your mother's nakedness? For as long as the son of Jesse lives upon the earth, neither you nor your kingdom shall be established. Now send and bring him to me, for he shall surely die. And again, this is something where Saul recognizes this idea of, as long as David lives, he's the one who's actually going to inherit the kingdom. He's the one the people support, and he seems to be the one that God has appointed and anointed for this role. Then Jonathan answered his father Saul, Why should he be put to death? What has he done? But Saul threw his spear at him to strike him. So Jonathan knew that it was the decision of his father to put David to death. Jonathan rose from the table in fierce anger and ate no food on the second day of the month, for he was grieved for David, and because his father had disgraced him. In the morning, Jonathan went out to the field of the appointment with David, and with him was a little boy. He said to the boy, Run and find the arrows that I shoot. As the boy ran, he shot an arrow behind him. When the boy came to the palace where Jonathan's arrow had fallen, Jonathan called after the boy and said, Is the arrow not beyond you? Jonathan called after the boy, Hurry, be quick, and do not linger. So Jonathan's boy gathered up the arrows and came to his master. But the boy knew nothing. Only Jonathan and David knew the arrangement. Jonathan gave his weapons to the boy and said to him, Go and carry them to the city. As soon as the boy had gone, David rose from beside the stone heap and prostrated himself with his face to the ground. He bowed 3 times, and they kissed each other and wept with each other. David wept the more. Then Jonathan said to David, Go in peace, since both of us have sworn in the name of the Lord, saying, The Lord shall be between me and you, and between my descendants and your descendants forever." He got up and left, and Jonathan went into the city. Um, so that's the bulk of what we're going to read. And again, we see something a little bit more interesting. We saw some like bigger, flowery, like broad language at the very beginning with Saul or 1 Samuel 18, where it's just like, oh, okay, they meet. There's no real description of what happens besides Jonathan gives David some of his like armor and belongings, and we can like infer what that means. But we don't know what that looks like. That's like a very sudden relationship. We don't know if that was actually very sudden, or if it's just described very like condensedly in the history. But here we get to see just some interaction between David and Jonathan that's in a very meaningful way. We get to see them talking and conversing with each other. We get to see them, in a sense, respecting what each other has to say. Like Jonathan, even though he believes that his father wouldn't behave in a certain way, he trusts David, and he trusts that David wouldn't lie to him. And so he goes to trust and verify and talk to his father Saul. And we can see this like very meaningful relationship between the two, and especially when they meet, when it's clear that Saul is angry with David and seeking to harm him. That, like it says, they meet and they wept and they kissed each other, which was like a more normative expression of affection at this point, especially between like really close friends of the same sex. And yeah, so I think it's neat that we can see this really deep and intimate friendship being portrayed, and see a little bit of like what that looks like in their conversation and their actions, rather than just these more vague, like general, even if powerful, but like very broad descriptions that may not help us very much in an educational manner of, I don't know, how do we live and have a relationship with each other, and like what do our meaningful brothers and relationships with our brothers and sisters in Christ look like? How do we support and love one another today, right? So he's mentioned one or two other times towards the end of 1 Samuel very briefly. There are a few interactions between Saul and David where Saul continues to try and kill David, and David continues to like be weirdly cool about it and like continue to recognize him as the Lord's anointed. And Saul is like cool about it for a while, and then he goes back to trying to kill David. And then a group invades Israel and probably kills Saul and seems to kill his sons, including Jonathan. And that's really cool because of what ends up happening at the very beginning of 2 Samuel. So Jonathan and Saul have been killed by the Philistines. And in the end of 1 Samuel, it actually says that the Philistines like riddled Saul with arrows in a way that he was extremely wounded, and he knew that he would not recover. And so he asked his armor bearer to kill him, to finish him off out of mercy, and also so that like the invading force wouldn't have like the honor or the privilege or whatever of taking his life. But the armor bearer refused, and so Saul falls on his own sword. That's the story that we get at the end of 1 Samuel. The beginning of 2 Samuel starts with David hearing about the death of Saul and Jonathan, and specifically from an Amalekite, I think I'm pronouncing that possibly somewhat correctly, who comes up and says that he was the one to finish off Saul. And he has Saul's like crown and like royal armband. He presents it to David and says like, hey, like he was suffering and he asked me to kill him, and so I stabbed him with a spear and now he's dead. Here's his stuff. And David is like, why would you kill the Lord's anointed? And has the man immediately executed. And the annotations that I've got here in the commentary talk about some inconsistencies in this guy's story, and this guy's story clearly contradicts with the end of First Samuel, and so it's argues for the theory that this Amalekite is lying about what happened, and that they had a reputation of being kind of scavengers in this situation, of coming in after battles and trying to find things of value. And so the commentary pushes the idea that the Amalekite probably found Saul's body and then took the signs of the kingship and brought them to David in hopes of getting some sort of reward. And David did not oblige to the idea of a reward. And then David does something very interesting. He, let me see, where's a good spot to start reading? We'll start here. So, he orders the death of this man, and he weeps and tears his clothes, hearing that Saul and Jonathan have died. It says, starting in 2 Samuel 1, verse 17, David intoned this lamentation over Saul and his son Jonathan. He ordered that the song of the bow be taught to the people of Judah. It is written in the book of Jashar. He said, and this is the song of the bow, which seems to just be titled The Bow, which is our callback to Jonathan's initial presentation of his armor and weapons. One of the items that he gives over is the bow, and I think that's neat. So it says, your glory, O Israel, lies slain upon your high places. How the mighty have fallen. Tell it not in Gath. Proclaim it not in the streets of Ashkelon, or the daughters of the Philistines will rejoice. The daughters of the uncircumcised will exult. You mountains of Gilboa, let there be no dew or rain upon you, nor bounteous fields. For there the shield of the mighty was defiled, the shield of Saul, anointed with oil no more. From the blood of the slain, from the fat of the mighty, the bow of Jonathan did not turn back, nor the sword of Saul return empty. Saul and Jonathan, beloved and lovely, in life and in death, they were not divided. They were swifter than eagles. They were stronger than lions. O daughters of Israel, weep over Saul, who clothed you with crimson and luxury, who put ornaments of gold on your apparel. How the mighty have fallen in the midst of the battle. Jonathan lies slain upon your high places. I am distressed for you, my brother Jonathan. Greatly beloved were you to me. Your love to me was wonderful, passing the love of women. How the mighty have fallen, and the weapons of war perished. Which is pretty powerful. The commentary talks about whether this was actually penned or scribed by David, and we don't know. It just says that he orders it, and it definitely seems to be from his perspective. And it also gives some really neat insight into the mountains of Gilboa being like cursed or whatever is where Saul and Jonathan fell, and the uncircumcised being sort of a pointed or rude or crass term for the Philistines. and something to speak negatively of them. And lastly, something very neat is it talks about the shield of Saul being anointed with oil no more. Has a neat double meaning of obviously Saul, the anointed one, dying and no longer being anointed to rule over Israel because he is dead. And David never wanted to take over that role of king, of anointed one, because there was already a Lord's anointed. He didn't think that was his place. With just this vision of Saul as like a steadfast shield, and leather shields being treated with oil so that they were always battle ready, and they were functional on the battlefield. And that's very neat. And lastly, this description of Jonathan. Jonathan lies slain upon your high places. I am distressed for you, my brother Jonathan. My brother's name is Jonathan, so this is doubly meaningful. Greatly beloved were you to me. Your love to me was wonderful, passing the love of women. How the mighty have fallen, and the weapons of war perished. If you know anything about the rest of David's story, his love for women was pretty great. Yeah, and I don't know about you guys. I have very rarely written poems or love songs for my homies. Maybe I need to start writing some poetry for Greg Moyer. I don't know. But yeah, like close relationships and friendships can be very meaningful. And this is something that's super evident throughout the Old Testament and the New Testament. And that I think really gets underemphasized in like modern Christian society. And yeah, I don't know. So it's exciting and cool to see this display of David and Jonathan. And as I read through it, I realized that I like was familiar with the stories, but I hadn't like a lot of it probably just glossed over. Like I wasn't thinking about it in this more meaningful way of this is a really intense and close and meaningful relationship that these two guys had with each other. And that's awesome. And I think I'm trying to think of how to phrase this. I think we tend not to talk about friendships that much because there's I think the Bible very much focuses on a lot of sources of conflict. And I think that's part of like our human nature and what draws our attention and what we feel is significant in recording. But that means whenever we read about relationships, we usually read about how they're fighting and how they're struggling, especially if we look at like, like Old Testament patriarchal lines, like nobody has a good relationship with their brothers. It's everybody's trying to kill everybody all the time. And like we talked about with Sarah 2 weeks ago, Cain succeeded. And so people are getting chased out of wherever, and even David's getting chased out of places here. And so seeing this recorded relationship that there's conflict, like Jonathan doesn't think that Saul would chase and kill David. But David has just been Saul is just trying to kill David. But they talk about it and they work through it. And they make these meaningful promises to each other. And they live them out. And there's even references in the commentary, I didn't keep reading, but the covenants that David and Jonathan make, especially regarding like David continuing to like serve and love Jonathan's house and his descendants, end up playing out further in the rest of 2 Samuel. And I think that's really, really cool. So I'm grateful to see a story of two brothers that love each other very much, even if they're not biological brothers, and that they get to weep and cry and laugh together and have a meaningful, committed relationship. And yeah, heck, write a love song about each other. Sure. And so that's really cool. And I am grateful to see that and grateful to ponder it some more. So a little bit longer of a morning prayer, but thanks for sticking around if you did. As always, well, so far I've been recording these the night before, but I do check in on the comments and see what everybody said and thought. So please continue to talk to each other and share what your thoughts are. And yeah, I don't know what stories of friendship are meaningful to you in the Bible and in your lives at the moment. I think this has been so much on my mind because one, just like a source of joy, of like support and love. I don't have a significant other at the moment. I don't have kids. And so my family is God and my friends and my church family, and I'm very grateful for them. And God's helped me learn to appreciate them and how meaningful that is. And that's awesome. And then also, as we've been working on Alpha, and again, I've been getting to know some other like friends in my life more. Just that, like, God moves so much through relationships, and even like going to watch a cartoon miniseries tonight at a gathering that wasn't particular or Christian in name or anything like that. That certainly had a mixed crowd of believers or non-believers or people of different backgrounds and beliefs and ideas. But getting to talk with some of them about, like, I don't know, just what God's been doing and what God's been sharing, and hear the same from them is cool. And like God's, works and expands and reaches really deep in ways like that. So, yeah, I'm grateful. Thanks for sticking around, and hope you have a great day and a great week. God loves you.